In terms of this bid to shut down Westminster, of course, Westminster is about to be prorogued tomorrow because urgently MPs had to come back after that Supreme Court ruling to do urgent business. Not quite sure what any of that urgent business was, but Parliament's not going to be sitting after tomorrow until Queen's speech on the 14th next week. Looks like, though, these protests will actually be shutting down all the roads for the Queen's speech and that procession and the like. I'm wondering what you and other MPs are making of those protests.
Well, everyone has the right to protest. I don't agree that the UK isn't leading the way on decarbonisation. I think the figures I saw that we were the best in the G7. There's some sort of 40% reduction in our carbon emissions since '92, better than anybody else. I mean, really, they ought to be protesting outside the Chinese embassy. I think we're opening a new coal-powered power station every week or two. So. It will be counterproductive, and it's okay to protest, but you're not allowed to obstruct the highway or break the law, and I would like to see the police use the full force of the law against these protesters if they overstep the mark.
Yeah, and yet, of course, they don't appear to use the full force because people say, well, it's a peaceful protest, but it doesn't make it lawful, does it? Because people's right to just, drive their car or walk where they wish to walk on the free highway.
Well, again, the hypocrisy is, by disrupting the roads, they create more congestion and more pollution, exactly what they claim to be fighting against. I think it's very trendy to be involved in this action. I've been to schools and they're doing very useful things like raising awareness about reducing the amount of single-use plastic. These are all very worthy things, but when people just come out to get the publicity on the streets of London, disrupting people going about their normal day-to-day affairs, I think they're going to be very counterproductive for their cause ultimately.
We've got 2 weeks of Extinction Rebellion protests on the streets of London. They're going to be basically stopping traffic around on the bridges of Westminster. Of course, although Parliament's prorogued tomorrow, probably not affecting a lot of MPs after tomorrow. London City Airport also to be targeted. But we're told between 20 and 30,000 people are going to be blocking streets and bridges in the capital, cutting off every road around Parliament. Do you agree with what the protesters are doing?
Well, I certainly agree that there is a climate emergency. I don't agree with action that is designed to, in effect, shut down Westminster or shut down London. No, I think there are ways of protesting. There are ways, for instance, the march that had 1 million people on it, as you'll recall, Julia, for Remain.
Oh, it didn't have 1 million, though, did it? That was totally debunked by the police.
Absolutely, no, it wasn't.
It had 450,000, I think,
well,
which is a lot of people.
Absolutely,
but not 1 million.
I would say 1 million, but you'd argue.
Oh, you can. Then I say 5 million. Let's just make numbers up.
No, I agree. It's not 5 million. But the fact is that was a march that was agreed with the police. It was peaceful. It obviously did disrupt things, but it was done in a contained and organised fashion. I think that is the sort of thing that the Extinction Rebellion people should negotiate with the police rather than ad hoc demonstrations, which frankly are designed to cause a lot of disruption, and I don't think really help particularly further their cause, a cause which I think we need to wake up to and respond to positively.
So you think the Extinction Rebellion protest should not go ahead? Do you think the police should use pretty heavy-handed action to remove them from the streets?
Well, I think they should have sought to negotiate something with the police that allows
but they haven't.
Well, I think then they need to, the police need to police it in the same way that they would police any other unauthorised demonstration, and I'll leave it to the police to decide how they do that.
In a moment, we're going to talk to Douglas Murray, the journalist and author, about, why we listen to these protesters. First up, let's talk to Donnachadh McCarthy, who's a spokesman for Extinction Rebellion, and joins us now. Good morning to you, Donnachadh.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning.
How are you?
What is the purpose? Well, I've got to be honest. I'm a little bit annoyed because I have to go through central London an awful lot, and I'm a bit annoyed, along with probably a lot of other people, that because of your political views, you think you've got the right to disrupt me and other people going about our working day. What is the purpose of the protests?
Basically, it's a simple thing. We wish the government to fulfil and pass a climate emergency act that would call on for a zero carbon target of 2025 and to set up a citizens' assembly to advise the government how to do this as fairly as possible. It's crucial the government tells the people the truth the depth of the emergency that we're facing, and the media also. The fact is that the government is taking the opposite actions of what we need to be saving Britain from absolute terrible consequences in the future.
Right.
Just had a report from the UN, IPCC, another terrifying report that highlighted London was one of the world's biggest cities under threat from rising.
When you say under threat?
Correct.
Under threat. There's actually been quite a lot of evidence that again, I think a lot of people listening to this would absolutely accept that we need to do things to tackle pollution and moving towards renewable energy as our source of energy. I would be fully in favour of that, but don't view things that the issue as being something about catastrophe or crisis or the word you use, terrifying. You say we need. The three main aims of Extinction Rebellion. What we want to see, government being honest about the climate emergency, citizens' assembly. Why do you want a citizens' assembly when we've already got a parliament? What will a citizens' assembly do that's different from a parliament?
Because it would actually accurately reflect the demographic of the British public, and it would be free from the vested interest.
So will my 12-year-old be represented then?
Well, actually, from 16 years upwards, obviously. But actually, at the moment, our government represents and is implementing policies that support the banks and the oil companies are investing something like $1.6 trillion in investing in more fossil fuels.
Well, of course they are, because we're still using fossil fuels.
No, but we can't. The international science has said we can use 20% of our current fossil fuel stocks, okay? And what's happening...
They say what? Apologies, say that again.
We can use a fifth of the fossil fuel resources we already have. So we can only burn a fifth of the oil stocks that we currently have.
Why? Because
by burning 100% of it, we go over the limit for 1.5 degrees rise in temperature, which risks runaway climate breakdown, which, as David Attenborough said, and the head of the United Nations has said, is incompatible with civilization as we know it. This is a shocking emergency. You do know that it's been a lot warmer than 1.5 degrees on Earth since human beings have existed. Yeah, and we have had...
And we've existed and carried on just fine. So why would you think that...
No, that's not true. We have never, ever had this rise in temperature so fast.
What's been the rise in temperature since the Industrial Revolution?
Pardon?
What's been the rise in temperature in the Earth since the Industrial Revolution?
Over 1 degree centigrade.
It's been under 1 degree centigrade.
And already look at the consequences.
Oh, well, aren't they wonderful? Have you not seen how wonderful the world is now in terms of fewer people starving, more people living longer, happier, healthier lives than ever before? It's a wonderful thing.
Julia, I really, really... My heart doesn't understand where you're coming from.
Well, I think the Industrial Revolution is the best thing that's ever happened to human beings because we have fewer people dying of starvation and people live twice the length of their life. It's a wonderful thing.
You're an intelligent human being and you must look at the science. It's not climate activists are saying this. It is scientists. It is saying if we continue burning this particular oil, this particular source of energy, humanity faces extinction. That is the UN head.
I don't think that is what the UN... I don't think they talked about human extinction, actually. I think a lot of that is... Let me...
Can I give you the exact quote?
Give me the exact quote.
UN, Antonio Figueras, in an extraordinary speech in September 2018, stated unless humanity started cutting carbon emissions radically, we faced, quote-unquote, an existential crisis. Existential crisis means extinction, and that is the UN head saying we have to have radical cuts as soon as possible.
Okay, all right, I'll stand correct on that. But the one I do want to get to our next guest, Douglas Murray. You talk about a zero carbon aim by 2025. The Labour Party currently have 2030. The Conservative Party, the Parliament have voted for 2050. I personally think that all three of those are insane because all three of those are pretty much unattainable unless we basically go back to horse and carts. We have seen a rapid fall in our carbon emissions. We've reduced carbon emissions faster than any other major advanced economy. Admittedly, we don't include aviation and shipping, but we've cut by 44% since 1990. We still are, of major industrial economies, we have reduced more. Is there not an argument that you should be demonstrating outside the Chinese embassy, the American embassy, rather than cutting off road links for the British Parliament?
Well, you've just given the UK government, this is the reason why we're in protesting in the heart of Parliament and heart of Westminster today, because the government isn't telling the truth on that. Yes, internal UK emissions have gone down around 200 billion tonnes in the last 30 years. However, aviation, shipping and imported embedded carbon, i.e. our heavy goods, are now manufactured in China. So our carbon emissions are down hardly anything in the last 30 years. And that's why we want people to tell the truth about the crisis and the lack of action by the government. The government is proposing £8,000 million cut in fuel duties for the fossil fuel corporations, whilst actually they have destroyed the onshore wind industry and suffocated the onshore solar industry. Our government is not acting honestly, and they need action. That's why we're on the streets today.
So we've seen a massive expanse and huge amounts of our taxes paid towards it. Just finally, we have, because I can see what the green carbon taxes are on my own gas and electricity bills. What do you?
That's not true either.
That is true.
Your bills at home, on average, are down around £200 to £300, taking into account those green taxes, because your homes and our homes are more efficient. Because
my home hasn't become any more efficient in recent years, because I live in a flat and I can't put any more insulation in. Let me ask you about a couple of other points, because time is against it. I want to get Douglas Murray. There's a lot of concern that cutting off Westminster Bridge is going to affect St Thomas Hospital. It's on the south side of Westminster Bridge. There's been concerns before of people trying to get through to hospital, visit patients, ambulances getting through. Are you not concerned at all that people will be prevented from getting life-saving care or visiting, elderly, sick relatives in hospital because of your protests?
Every day of the week in London there are protests. There are
nothing like this.
Cat dams.
Roads aren't shut. No, roads aren't shut down every day of the week.
100 kilometres of road are closed for the marathon. We have been liaising very carefully with the police and with the emergency services, so there will be access to St Thomas's Hospital, because we actually share those concerns.
That's going to be fine. And just finally...
But, however, we must remember, every day of the week in London, 24 people die from fossil fuel pollution.
No, they don't. Again, that's a complete lie. They simply don't. That's simply a lie. Just finally, I want to ask you, Donnachadh, there'll be lots of people listening to this that will simply say, look, you have these views and you want to push these views. You're very passionate about it. You wanted to go and sit on the streets for 2 weeks. I have to say, small point, does anyone have a job involved in this? Because most of us have to actually be at work most days. But also, why don't you stand for election? Why don't you put a manifesto forward? Why don't you stand for election? We're going to have a general election really soon. If the people are behind you and your message is clear and you're getting a lot of interviews on the media, why don't you stand for election and let the British people decide?
Okay, 2 points first. First of all, you said it was untrue about people dying. The NHS... If you think you're better than the NHS...
No, I can assure you, I've read the original report. That's not what it claims. We're going to have to move on from that. I need you to answer the question about an election.
Yeah,
I can 100% assure you that fact is not true.
Well, OK, I will set the NHS line. However, on the point of democracy, in London, people have voted for decades for MPs in South East London, for mayors in London, and for prime ministers who all promised us they would not expand Heathrow Airport. We have tried the democratic route and it has failed us. Democracy, shockingly in this country, is betraying the people's desire for a cleaner, low-carbon society. We've tried it.
So at this point, you just go to the streets and you have mass civil disobedience because you think that... I mean, should people who voted for Brexit go on the streets as well, given that democracy's failed them?
Well,
should they?
We live in a democracy. If they wish...
Well, you just said we didn't live in a democracy.
Well, in terms of we have the right still, to a limited extent, to protest.
Well, you have a right to peaceful protest. This is peaceful protest, but it's not going to be lawful protest because obstructing the highway isn't lawful. You're not going to be going around smashing things up, although, I mean, a lot of people gluing themselves to doors and causing damage is criminal damage. But it's not peaceful for the people who are trying to make their way to and from work. It's not peaceful for the people whose bus routes are cancelled and the like, is it? It doesn't feel peaceful to them.
Well, it is peaceful in terms of we are non-violent. We're dedicated to Gandhian's principles of non-violence. Gandhi saw to actually change the system that was actually trashing India's economy and health, that he did mass peaceful non-violent direct.
But did he not have access? You have access to the ballot box, though.
Yeah, but I've actually said it's failed us.
But you're saying not enough. But no, basically what you're saying is not enough people are voting for you because you haven't got public support. So you're going to force people to listen. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
No, we're actually saying that Britain is facing an existential crisis, and the complacency of the public and the government needs to be waken up by peaceful. We've got thousands of people coming to London. Doctors,
you have thousands
lawyers,
of people
professors.
not coming to London.
We've got doctors, lawyers, nurses, professors, workmen, bus drivers who
Yes,
actually
but
understand that
what? Okay, 20 to
Can I finish my point?
30,000 people on the streets.
They
Well,
are so
that's
concerned
65
that they're
million who
willing to
aren't
be
on the
arrested.
streets.
They're so concerned that they'll be willing to jeopardize their future careers because they understand the crisis we're in. And Julia, please, imagine if you're wrong on your analysis of the science. What does that mean for our kids and the future of Britain? It is
We
a
are the
patriotic.
world. I always want to start singing when people start saying that, because it's sort of, I'm happy to have a really sensible debate about the science and the economics of this and the political solutions. But what I don't want to have is either people just getting hysterical and sending 16-year-old children out to do their work. And I don't like people forcing people to listen by basically going out in civil disobedience. I don't think that's what we do in a democratic society.
Okay, well, if a building's on fire and people don't
We're
know...
We're not on fire.
Well, actually, sorry, Julia, from the science we are. And then you talked about the economics. Okay, let's talk about the economics. That's something that wouldn't hurt anybody. In the next 5 to 10 years, the oil companies are proposing to invest $5,000 billion in finding new fossil fuels.
Excellent, brilliant. Finding new, cleaner fossil fuels, like fracking and the like. Brilliant. It's going to be a cleaner fossil fuel. Do you know what, Donnachadh? We're going to get you in the studio at some point, and we're going to do this for much longer because we are so over time. Haven't got to talk to Douglas Murray yet, who's waiting very patiently on the line. You wrote a very interesting piece in the papers over the weekend about Extinction Rebellion. I suppose the fair summary of it is, why are we listening to these people? So why are we?
Well, I do think, I have to say, that this is an unalloyed example of fanaticism that we're hearing. Fanaticism which is just undisguisable. It's been undisguisable in every age, and it's undisguisable in this one when it appears. People who think that they know so much better than everyone else that they are willing to actually risk the lives of everyone else, willing to cut off hospitals, willing to sort of vaguely think after the fact about things they hadn't thought before they spoke. Willing to shut down cities, let's just look at their most important claim, willing to completely immiserate the economy, completely immiserate.
And this is the 2025 zero carbon emission target. This would involve, and again, there's so much to get through. I didn't get to all of it with Donnachadh and McCarthy. Time's always against you in these interviews. But this would involve, and again, the Labour policy is 2030, the Tory policy 2050 now. But we are talking about changing our economy so drastically. I mean, to all intents and purposes, unachievable unless, say, for instance, we all stop having cars, diesel, petrol, even electric cars, stop flying, stop eating meat, stop heating our homes. We were talking about a mass change in the way we live our lives.
Right, and every single thing they claim is either untrue or has absolutely no context to it, or can be easily countered by a simple point to highlight something else. For instance, even if their claims about the number of people they claim are dying because of the current situation, which are wild claims, even if they were the case, look at the fact that the means of global economic growth that we have at the moment, the capitalist system, which Extinction Rebellion explicitly says it wants to destroy, that system of growth has raised around a half of people around the world who were suffering from absolute poverty, out of absolute poverty in the first decade of this century alone. So when they describe the system of economic growth, which has done such an extraordinary and miraculous thing in our own recent lifetimes, as being the cause of so much suffering and death, there is so little that they put out there that even begins to counter the fanatical claims that they are making.
Do you think that too much attention is being paid to them? Because to a certain extent, their tactics are working rather well, aren't they? They're all in the media. We're discussing. There'll be all of their antics and the people dancing around boats in silly outfits on bridges. That's going to be all over the TV news. They are setting the agenda. It's working. Do you think government shouldn't be giving in to this sort of pressure?
Well, I don't think government is giving in to pressure. There are some political parties that are trying to piggyback on the claims, and I think that certainly politicians have been finding it incredibly difficult to voice any opposition to sort of Gretaism, which is obviously another wing of this at the moment. And I explain why I think that is. It's basically been set up to be impossible to oppose and be still regarded as a decent person in mainstream politics. But if you shut down major cities, you should not be able to do so unopposed. Clearly, Extinction Rebellion are not entirely cooperating with the police, because there was a police raid on their headquarters in London on Saturday. If they were cooperating, the police wouldn't have raided one of their headquarters. But the other point about this is that clearly there is a campaigning tactic to say the most extreme and outlandish thing imaginable, i.e., we're all going to die very soon. Maybe some of them believe it, maybe a lot of them do. But the point is that from a campaigning point of view, if you make such an outrageous set of claims as Extinction Rebellion are making, you do get people's attention. And at the very least, you are likely somewhere along the line to create some kind of compromise, i.e. some people will say, well, maybe not everyone's going to die, maybe a third of us, or so on, to be fatuous about it.
So they change, they move the over to the window, really, don't they? Can I also ask you about, say, Extinction Rebellion? These protests start today, shutting down Parliament. Of course, Parliament's going to be prorogued from tomorrow anyway. Of course, these protests going on 2 weeks. Big concerns, not just about people getting access over Lambeth Bridge and Westminster Bridge and elsewhere in central London, but also the fact that St Thomas's Hospital, no offence to MPs, rather more important work a lot of the time, on the south side of Westminster Bridge is going to be affected. We've spoken to an Extinction Rebellion spokesman saying that they've got matters in hand, but we've certainly seen problems before with people getting through those crowds on the bridges to get to the hospital. Are you concerned about access to that hospital for emergency vehicles and people visiting loved ones?
Well, tackling climate change is important, and I think our net zero, the law that we changed to ensure that the UK gets to net zero emissions by 2050 is a huge step forward. And so the government is tackling the issues that the protesters are raising, but I think nobody should lose access to a hospital as a result of protesters. I'm enthusiastic about listening to the message that the protesters have got, and there are ways to do that without stopping people being able to reach hospitals. So I very much hope that doesn't happen. And I think we will be keeping a very close eye on it.
Although this is, they say, a non-violent protest, a peaceful protest, do you think that police should take all action to ensure that people travelling across those bridges or around London generally should be able to go about their lawful business unheeded by these people?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I think that the people, people in a democracy, there are enormous numbers of ways to make your voice heard, whether that's voting or writing to your MP or turning up in Parliament to meet your MP, and Parliament responds. We, as I say, we passed that law to get to net zero, and the reason that we have a democracy is so that voices like this could be taken into account without having to get in the way of everybody else going about their daily business.